Welcome into another Inside Carolina Postgame Live. 4 in less than 24 hours for your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johni T-Shirt and Congruity. That is Rob Harrington. That is Dewey Burke. Carolina falls to Auburn 85-72. Dewey, I'll come to you first. I mean, that's just watching that game to me, I'm just thinking this is a terrible matchup for North Carolina. But your thoughts?
Yeah, it was, but disappointed, though, in how we came out. I mean, we started so slow against Dayton that you thought more urgency, more fight, more toughness. I thought even though, just looking down at the roster, Auburn is much bigger, and I thought that was going to be a problem, no question. I was disappointed in our effort, especially from our starting bigs. They're bigger and more athletic, but they also played harder, which should never happen. And it kind of felt like it was never that close, unfortunately. Their big was a problem. I mean, God, he started like he was going to beat David Robinson. We really had no answer for him. But their length bothered us, bothered RJ. We couldn't really get anything around the rim. Didn't shoot the ball particularly well. So I think there's a lot to learn from. I think they're good. I think Auburn's good. They'll probably go and play awful against Duke, but I think they're good. They're long. They shoot it. They have a great big. And then that lefty guard is good. So, I think some of the guys on our bench played well. Lubin gave us good minutes. Like to see Drake play more and more, but overall disappointed.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'll get my line in. I think Drake Powell should play as many minutes as he can handle, especially if Carolina's going to get where they're getting out of the 4 there. Rob, get in here. Last night, you had a long diatribe planned, and Carolina came back and won the game in the second half. Tell me what you're thinking watching this one.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat everything Dewey said, but clearly this was a subpar effort from start to finish. I thought that there was no magic in the second half. Auburn clearly was the physically dominant team, but at the same time, there's something wrong with the starting front court. This is a pattern now where the Withers-Washington front court just hasn't worked. And I think this goes to your point about Drake Powell playing more minutes and maybe just working some other combinations. But because the starters haven't been good lately, and K. Tyson continues to not play much. I mean, I can't even say he's struggling at this point. He's just not playing much. And when he's out there, things don't seem to go right for him. So I'm curious how Hubert will think about this. I'm not sure that he would make a big change tomorrow, just given the time frame. But it wouldn't surprise me if they try something different against Alabama.
Yeah, Dewey, your thoughts there. I mean, K. Tyson was this guy, and I don't want to bang on the kid at all. But now that you're getting paid lots of money, he's virtually unplayable in games like this, and that's harsh, but it's true. And we saw he played 1 minute and looked very lost out there in it. So what do you do if you're Hubert Davis, Dewey, with your issues with Washington and Withers and Tyson? Those are your 3 biggest guys there. You got Lubin, who played well. You mentioned him.
Yep.
But he's small. And so the challenge here is if your 3 guards do not light it up against a good team, you get games like this.
You do, man. Look, I agree about the few moments that Cade was in the game. He looked completely overmatched. Missed free throw, which he shouldn't do as a shooter, even though it's hard being cold coming in. I get that. Luckily it's early. Rotations will still be kind of working themselves out. But agree. The starting front court is so far not the answer. There's you're not getting anything out of it. It's not like you can point to something and say, well, at least we're strong defensively, or we're clearing the glass very well, or we're getting a lot out of the pick and roll or pick and pop. We're not getting anything out of it. So it'll be interesting to see if he tries to go a little bit smaller with perhaps Drake. I think all of us would enjoy watching a lineup. I mean, not a starting lineup, but watching a lineup of Elliott, RJ, Seth, Drake and Lubin, because that's athletic, that's fast. We're not going to do well on the backboards, but we should be able to fly around defensively, potentially switch 1 through 5, and maybe just make it a little more hectic. One thing I noticed was that the Auburn guys were breathing pretty heavy in the first half. And on my group text with my friends, we were just saying the only way we get in this is if the pace goes nuts. We get a bunch of stops and we try to run them to death. Well, we didn't get those stops. I thought that was our only chance, and it just never really came to be. But you would think he'll look at it, maybe not tomorrow, but something's got to change. We've played some elite athletic teams, and our lack of size and length has showed.
Rob, when you look at it, I felt like the difference today was that Dayton didn't hit shots, and then Carolina rebounded the basketball. I assumed that Auburn would have had more than just 11 offensive rebounds, but it felt like Carolina never could get back in it because they never could get a stop and finish a defensive possession, whether it's somebody missing a box out, whether it's somebody missing a tap out. So I ask you the same question. How do you deal with the issues? Do you just go full-blown small and run, and live with that? Or is there another solution that you've seen so far?
No, I definitely haven't seen a solution so far. I mean, I think the biggest problem is the 4 is such a wild card. We sort of know the 5 is. I think Jalen Washington and Lubin eventually will get better. Maybe not be the most elite tandem they've ever had, but okay. The 4 is where I have more concerns. The thing that stood out to me tonight, though, was not so much the defense, which has been a problem all year, but the offense. The offense really devolved at times into a lot of dribbling and some possessions with no passes. Guys just playing too much one-on-one. It looked more like 2023 with the Love and Davis backcourt. The suffering through that season with not a lot of choreography, not a lot of coordination among teammates. And there was some of that tonight, along with some really difficult attempts by all the guards, getting into the paint too deep without much of a plan. But again, they were having to make plays because they weren't getting much help either.
Dewey, and we're talking with Dewey Burke, Rob Harrington on Inside Carolina Postgame podcast. Not going to be here long tonight, even though there's 250 people in here. It's incredible. Inside Carolina fans, Carolina basketball fans. But Dewey, talk a little bit about the guard play there. The size clearly bothered them. I mean, when you're 6 feet or less going up against a guy that's 6'7", that's pretty much equally as athletic as you, it's going to be a problem. And RJ and Cadeau. Seth Trimble feels like, to me, he's the only guy that can handle that physicality. And I want to talk about him separately. But Dewey, what'd you see from RJ and Cadeau that they just couldn't get in a rhythm because they couldn't get anything clean? It was always a challenge there.
Yeah, I mean, from an athletic perspective, Seth is the one that's on that level, but he doesn't create well off the bounce for himself in the half court. When you don't get stops, you have to play offense in the half court. Trimble's obviously elite in transition and getting out and running the lane and getting to the rim, but he doesn't necessarily get to the rim on his own accord very well. Elliott does get to the rim on his own accord, but he's undersized, so he couldn't finish. RJ, quickness is not his strong suit. He's crafty, and typically he can find a way to get a shot off, but those guys were so big and long that he couldn't. So, this is the perfect recipe for disaster for our perimeter players in terms of being able to really get going offensively, because they're long, they're athletic, they're just as quick. And then if you do happen to get into the rim, a couple 7-footers waiting for you. And I thought both their starting big, obviously, Broome was great, but I thought their backup big was solid as well. And say what you want about Bruce Pearl, but if he tells the commentators that his backup big is the best defensive player in the country, there's something there. He's obviously a decent defender. And so it's going to be hard that way for our first 3 guys being 6'3" and under, and 2 barely 6 feet. The way you beat size and athleticism is typically with elite fundamentals on the offensive end, elite screening, elite ball movement, elite execution. And I don't think we saw much of any of that. Or you beat them in transition, which we didn't do because we didn't get stops. So Yeah, offensively, it was a big time struggle, and we played most of the game in the half court. And that's not how we want to play. That's not how we're accustomed to playing. And that much length against a set defense is hard to score on.
Yeah, Carolina scored a little bit over a point per possession, but Rob, layups. Without looking, what do you think Carolina shot on layups tonight?
Oh gosh, by percentage or by raw numbers?
Raw numbers.
Let's say 7 for 19.
11 for 23, which is right on it. At the rim for Carolina, obviously dunks are different. This is a recipe. People talk about recipes all the time, and I don't watch enough college basketball to pay attention. I know Duke's got the similar size that this Auburn team has. Maybe not the athleticism, maybe. But your take, same question I asked Dewey, is how do you combat that, especially in the half court if they're not going to get stops on the defensive end where they can get out and run?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dewey. They have to execute a lot better, screen better, get more off-ball movement. Like that was the comparison I was making to 2023 when they didn't do those things, and you had a real ground down offense that was hard to watch. I don't think this will get to that level. I think this team will actually be very good offensively. It devolved some tonight into a little bit of that because they weren't getting good attempts, and so the default became, okay, well, I'm just going to create something because the team just wasn't executing well. I would add too, Tommy, I want to make sure we get there before we go off, is because you and I have in prior games said this is Cadeau's team, this is Cadeau's team. I'm looking for him to have a good game tomorrow night, whatever form that takes. He's had a rough Maui, I think. Mentally he hasn't stabilized the team. He did have a good stretch late last night, but overall this hasn't been a good experience for him, I think. And he can't check out. He can't get frustrated and pull at his hair like he does. I want to see him regain the reins because I think he's the one who could get them into better offense. And when he isn't doing that, it just becomes a very disjointed.
Dewey, what's the challenge of playing in a tournament like this? I mean, we saw what UConn did. Dan Hurley melts down. They lose first round. Dan Hurley melts down. They lose in the second round to a team that's nowhere near as good as the teams on this side of the bracket. But Carolina has a great comeback against a good, solid Dayton team. Can't get it done against, I think, a near elite Auburn team. And now you play a Michigan State team, and we all know what that means for Carolina. So what's the challenge, not only from a coaching perspective, but also from these players getting up off the mat and having to lace them back up? Everybody talks about you want to play again as soon as possible, but those short free throws at the end made me feel like they're tired. They're getting a little gassed, and now you got another one coming up in less than 24 hours.
Yeah, and playing against Michigan State, it'll be a rock fight, really physical, and they'll bang, and we need to be ready for that. I'm reminded of my senior year. We played in the preseason NIT at the Garden, and we lost the first game to Gonzaga, which, it sucks when you go to one of these tournaments. You obviously want to be playing for the championship. And the difference, though, is we had a day off in between. And so we had to go practice. And that was one of the single hardest practices I ever went through. The practice in between Gonzaga. And then we went out the next night and played Tennessee and actually played great. But that practice in between those two games was one of the hardest we had because he was so mad at how we played against Gonzaga. They don't have the benefit of having that practice and having much film time. They'll probably move right on to Michigan State clips. But, I'm not worried about their legs. They're young enough. It's early in the season. They should be fine. I would like to see them start the game better. These last two games and obviously the Kansas game, we get ourselves in such a huge hole and have to expend so much effort trying to climb back in the game. Let's be ready from the jump. Let's be physical from the jump. Let's take the fight to them from the jump. And they won't be able to cover that in a practice, but you can easily get that message across. And, they're not stupid kids. They've now done it 3 times. And so there's enough to point to say, hey, something needs to change about how we warm up, how we approach the first part of the game, and let's see if we can sit down at the under 16, under 12 timeout and not be down double digits and feel like we haven't even arrived. That would be the challenge in my mind.
Somebody in the chat asked about the plus minus, and I'm not married to that as a great stat, but I will give it to you. Jalen Washington minus 15, Jalen Withers minus 19, Cadeau minus 16, RJ minus 14, Trimble minus 8, Drake Powell plus 9. Rob, close us out here. And if you've got anything else to talk about, Dewey, let me know. But I think it's time to pull the plug on this one. Rob, you get the final thoughts. Carolina loses this one, a tough physical matchup against a team much taller and more athletic. And now you go up against a Michigan State team, as Dewey called it, a rock fight's ahead.
Yes. Well, we said last week they needed to get 2 quality wins. Tomorrow night will determine whether they've accomplished that. They won't have, no matter what happens, they won't have gotten a marquee win, which they had an opportunity to do out there. So now they're 0-2 this year between the game tonight and Kansas, but they still would have 2 quality wins. And so there's something to be gained from it. And then you go into the Alabama game with some confidence. Obviously, if they lose tomorrow night, that would raise a lot of questions about where they are going into such an elite matchup like that. So I am looking for them. It's a different opponent. It's a rock fight. But the one saving grace from the Heels' perspective is that Michigan State has shot the ball terribly. And unlike these last 2 teams, now maybe they'll get hot in this game, but I would at least not look for them to go bombs away on 3. So it should be 2 versus 2, free throws versus free throws, the typical game against these guys. So it should be a fun game, and I think it gives them at least an opportunity to come back home feeling pretty good about what they've done.
Folks asked, shooting, listen to these numbers, and we'll get out of here. Second half numbers. Both teams shoot 40%. Or both teams, shoot 43.8% for the second half. Both teams shoot 43.5% for the game, which is pretty insane. Auburn, of course, makes 11 threes to Carolina's only 6. And that ultimately is the difference, along with some offensive rebounds. And Johni Broome going 20 and 19 or 23 and 19, also had 5 assists. Dewey, anything left? I think it's pretty simple. Carolina's got to figure out the front court, and RJ, Seth, and Elliott have to play better. And to your point, they have to start better. Otherwise, we're going to be doing a lot of these similar discussions. Any last thoughts?
No, it's not to repeat myself, but that's what it is for me. That's what I'll be looking for, seeing how we start the game, immediately from the opening tip, because Michigan State will play hard because Izzo gets in their ass. So we need to bring it first 4 minutes. That under 16 timeout, I want to be pleased with our effort. That's all I'm focused on tomorrow.
Indeed. Carolina, I believe that game's at 9:30 Eastern time tomorrow. Carolina, Michigan State. I guess the third place game or whatever they call it these days. Sponsored by Johni T-Shirt and Congruity. Shout out to Rob Harrington. Shout out to Dewey Burke. And shout out to the 315 people that are currently in the live chat at 2:06 a.m. on the East Coast. We'll be back tomorrow. It will be tomorrow. It will not be past midnight tomorrow. We'll be here. Guys, appreciate you joining me. Everybody, appreciate you watching.